Once Nike's biggest threat, now a brand most people forgot. Under Armour wasn't supposed to fail. It was born in a college basement, turned a sweaty t-shirt into a billion-dollar innovation, and by the mid-2010s, it was America's great sportswear hope, hailed as the Nike Slayer. The company raced past Adidas in its own backyard, signed Steph Curry, Tom Brady, and The Rock, and soared to a $20 billion valuation. But today, its sales are shrinking. Its stock has crashed nearly 90% from its peak, and even its athletes have walked away. The brand that once defined grit and innovation now struggles with an identity crisis, unsure whether it's a sportswear giant, a lifestyle brand, or something in between. And after years of turmoil, founder Kevin Plank has stepped back in, raising the question of whether he can save the brand he built. So, how did Under Armour go from a revolutionary challenger to a struggling brand, fighting to stay relevant? And can it ever reclaim its place in American sportswear?
Shares of Under Armour are sinking this morning after the retailer gave annual sales and profit guidance.
To understand how far Under Armour has fallen, we have to go back to the mid-1990s, when the entire company was nothing more than one man's side project in his grandmother's basement. Kevin Plank wasn't a star athlete at the University of Maryland. He was a walk-on fullback, more grit than glory. But he hated how heavy and useless cotton t-shirts became under his gear. His idea was simple: a shirt made of synthetic fibers that pulled sweat away from the body. It was a niche product, born from personal frustration, but Plank believed in it. The early years were brutal. He drove up and down the East Coast with boxes of shirts in his car, handing them out to anyone who would listen. Equipment managers ignored his calls, and most athletes had never heard of him. He maxed out credit cards just to keep the project alive, and by 1997, his bank account was almost empty. The turning point came not from the NFL, but from Hollywood. In 1999, Under Armour gear was featured in Oliver Stone's football movie Any Given Sunday, followed by the replacements a year later. Suddenly, this unknown brand had screen time in front of millions of fans. Orders jumped to nearly $750,000, and Under Armour started to look like more than a basement dream. By the early 2000s, the company had found its voice. It wasn't polished or aspirational like Nike. It was raw, aggressive, and aimed squarely at the hardcore athlete. In 2003, Under Armour launched the campaign that would define it: Protect This House. The ad was loud, gritty, and unforgettable, and it turned a niche sports brand into a cultural phenomenon. Kids shouted the slogan on practice fields across America. From there, the numbers took off. By 2005, sales had reached $400 million, and the company went public. Cleats followed in 2006, then training and running shoes by 2009. And the endorsements kept rolling in: Tom Brady, Michael Phelps, and eventually Steph Curry. Names that signaled Under Armour wasn't just another apparel brand, it was a rising power. The growth streak was unprecedented. For 26 consecutive quarters, sales grew more than 20%. By 2014, Under Armour had overtaken Adidas to become the #2 sportswear brand in the United States. Wall Street valued the company at $20 billion, and the media crowned it with a title that seemed unthinkable a decade earlier: the Nike Slayer. Kevin Plank himself declared, "We will be the #1 sports brand in the world." And for a moment, it did seem unstoppable. Under Armour had beaten Adidas in the US, its stock was soaring, and investors called it the only real threat Nike had faced in decades. But success has a way of distorting vision. By the mid-2010s, Under Armour started to lose sight of what made it strong. Instead of doubling down on performance apparel, Kevin Plank tried to reinvent the company as something bigger, a tech brand. Between 2013 and 2015, Under Armour spent over $700 million buying fitness tracking apps like MyFitnessPal Endomondo, and Map My Fitness. On paper, it sounded futuristic. Millions of users generating data on workouts, nutrition, and sleep. In practice, it had little to do with selling shirts and shoes. Meanwhile, the core business was already under pressure. Retail was shifting, and Under Armour was dangerously exposed. For years, it had leaned heavily on wholesale partners like Sports Authority to get its products into malls. When Sports Authority went bankrupt in 2016, Under Armour lost more than $100 million in sales overnight. Mall traffic was collapsing too, but instead of pulling away, the brand kept betting on a channel that was dying. Nike and Adidas were already ahead, building their own stores and pushing direct-to-consumer online. And while the distribution faltered, consumer taste was moving in a new direction. Athleisure was exploding. Yoga pants, leggings, and casual performance gear from Lululemon, Nike, and even fast fashion chains became everyday wear. But Under Armour missed it. Its products were still built for hardcore athletes, technically sound, but lacking the design and versatility people now expected. Teens and young adults started to see the brand as outdated. There were other cracks too. Some of its most important athlete relationships began to strain. Steph Curry, the face of Under Armour basketball, was reportedly unhappy when Plank made comments praising Donald Trump during his presidency. Curry didn't stay quiet. When asked about Plank's remarks, he shot back, "I agree with that description if you remove the et from asset." By 2016, the warning signs were impossible to ignore. Growth slowed, and when Under Armour finally missed earnings expectations, its stock collapsed by more than 25% in a single day. Wall Street's Nike slayer had become one of its fastest falling stars. What followed was less a stumble and more a freefall. After a decade of explosive growth, Under Armour suddenly looked shaky. In 2017, it posted its first quarterly loss as a public company. The numbers told the story. Revenue growth, once running at 20% or more every quarter, dropped to low single digits. The stock, which had peaked in 2015, lost nearly 3/4 of its value within 2 years. The brand's image collapsed alongside the numbers. Discount racks at Kohl's and TJ Maxx were filled with Under Armour gear, destroying the premium aura it had built. Among teens and younger athletes, surveys showed the brand falling out of favor. Under Armour went from cool to an afterthought. In basketball, even Steph Curry's signature line couldn't replicate the magic of Nike's Jordans. Inside the company, leadership turnover added to the chaos. CEOs came and went, each promising a turnaround but rarely staying long enough to deliver one. And Kevin Plank himself became a liability. Reports surfaced of a toxic corporate culture, executives expensing strip club visits, allegations of misconduct, and a company atmosphere that felt more like a frat house than a Fortune 500 firm. The SEC later opened an investigation into accounting practices, accusing Under Armour of pulling forward sales to hit targets. At the same time, the products themselves weren't breaking through. Footwear, the category that was supposed to cement Under Armour as a Nike rival, consistently lagged. Innovations like Speedform showed promise, but lacked the cultural impact of Nike's Air Force or Adidas's Ultra Boost. Fashion mattered more than ever, and Under Armour couldn't shake its reputation for making clunky, performance-first shoes that no one wanted to wear off the court. By the late 2010s, the narrative had flipped completely. The Nike slayer had become a cautionary tale. Instead of chasing growth, Under Armour was fighting just to stay relevant. But could the brand pull off a comeback? Or had it already lost the battle for America's athletes? In 2020, Under Armour tried to hit the reset button. The company unwound its tech detour, selling the diet and exercise app it had bought for hundreds of millions, shutting another down entirely, and scrapping side projects like its subscription box. It was a public admission that the data dream hadn't translated into products people actually wanted. The message grew clearer year by year. Fewer distractions, Fewer SKUs, fewer promos. Operationally, some of it worked. Inventory came under control. Promotions were dialed back. Wholesale partners stopped getting flooded with products they couldn't sell at full price. Margins improved, proof that discipline still mattered. But brand heat doesn't return just because a spreadsheet looks better. Consumers had been trained to hunt the red tags. Walking that back takes time, and a truly must-have product. Meanwhile, the market was moving. Nike and Adidas weren't just competing on performance anymore, they were winning on design and cultural relevance. Lululemon owned athleisure. New names like On and Hoka took over running, offering shoes that felt technical and looked modern. Under Armour kept making gear that performed in the gym, but rarely became the shoe or hoodie people wanted to wear everywhere else. Athlete stories helped with visibility, not direction. Steph Curry stayed loyal and built out his sub-label. The Rock campaigns were massive. Golf remained a steady pillar. But the broader perception problem lingered. Away from the court and weight room, Under Armour didn't feel like the brand driving the conversation. To younger shoppers, it wasn't the default choice for school, weekends, or the airport fit. That's where culture is won now. By the early 2020s, the company had stabilized the business but not the myth. The underdog challenger was still alive, leaner, more disciplined, but no longer setting the pace. Which raised the harder question. If focus and cost control weren't enough, what would it actually take to matter again? In 2024, Under Armour turned back to the man who started it. Kevin Plank returned as CEO with a back-to-basics plan. Simplify the line, cut the noise, protect price integrity, and rebuild around performance, especially men's apparel, the category that made Under Armour famous. As Plank put it, the turnaround was about returning to focus and standards. The org was retooled around categories, distribution was tightened, and the company signaled it would rather sell less at the right price than more on markdown. On paper, the discipline showed up. In fiscal 2025, gross margin improved as promotions eased and inventory got cleaner. But the top line told a different story. Revenue fell to roughly $5.2 billion, down about 9% year over year, and the company swung to a net loss of a little over $200 million. North America, Under Armour's home field, declined double digits. Asia Pacific slipped too. Guidance into fiscal 2026 stayed cautious, even as management talked up sharper execution and a tighter focus. That's the paradox of a turnaround done by the book. You can make the business healthier while the brand is still healing. Cutting SKUs, pulling back discounts, and narrowing distribution can restore credibility, but they don't, on their own, create demand. Demand comes from a product people obsess over, and that's the fork in the road. If Under Armour is going to matter again, it needs a true hero, not a slogan, a spreadsheet, or even a celebrity, an unmistakable product franchise that fuses performance with design in a way people want to wear every day. Think a trainer that crosses the gym-to-street gap naturally. A running silhouette that looks as good at brunch as it does at mile 5. Apparel that reads premium at full price, not deal at 40% off. One franchise that anchors the brand, and then a second to prove it wasn't a fluke. Distribution has to tell that same story. Fewer outlets, cleaner floors, fuller price. DTC that feels intentional and premium, not just another promo channel. Wholesale that prioritizes sell-through over volume. So, the logo stops appearing where the brand least wants to be seen. Most of all, a clear identity. Under Armour wins when it is the serious performance brand with gear you actually want to wear, when grit looks good. If it chases fashion for fashion's sake, it becomes a copy. If it ignores style entirely, it becomes a relic. The answer is the middle that Nike has owned for years, and new players have learned fast. Design that earns its place in culture, built on tech that earns its place in sport. Kevin Plank says the reset is about focus and standards. The fundamentals are moving in the right direction. But in a market where culture and aesthetics decide the winners, focus is only the starting line. So the question remains, can he give Under Armour the product the culture can't ignore and protect this house a second time? What do you think? Can Under Armour still matter in 2025 and beyond, or has its moment already passed? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.